one thing that we started up with the second language creation conference is we started kind of having these panels that really just ended up turning into sort of a large semi-directed group discussion. And I think that's the best way to describe what's about to happen. So a while back, Christophe came up with, first of all, actually he came up with a couple of different ideas for a couple of different talks. He ended up selecting one, and I suggested for this one, why not make that a panel? And the idea was, or the main theme was trends in Conlanging. And so if I explain a little bit, there are obviously several lists out there, but the two I'd say most prominent ones are the Conlang list and the CBB. And they've been around for quite a while. When was the ZBB started?
2002.
2002. Okay, so almost a decade for both. Well, more than a decade for Conlang, almost a decade. Next year, a decade for the ZBB. And in that time, obviously, there have been a lot of people on it with a lot of different ideas about languages. And I know, especially this past year on the Conlang list, for example, I kept on seeing these messages. Hey, what if we blah, 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 and then my immediate response was, oh yeah, I see this post from 7 years ago. But, kind of the idea is just kind of like with other things, there are kind of trends as far as languages that people create go. And obviously, sometimes these languages never really exist beyond, say, the initial idea and maybe 20 words of vocabulary, but they kind of contribute to a general. So to start us off with the master and final word on this. I'm kidding. But Christophe, who's been on the Conlang list
since I think 1997 or 1998.
Oh my goodness! And in 1996 was when it moved over to the Brown side. But anyway. He's going to go ahead and share your thoughts on some of the things you've seen, and then pass them on.
Well, I'll do my best at least. When I got that idea, it's basically once in a while I try to look at the archives for things I've said or things others have said that I think about and try to find, and then I end up reading half of the archive because it's also interesting. But what I've seen is that, like all communities, there are trends, there are fashions, there are things that suddenly come up, and suddenly everybody's talking about it or doing something about it, and then it dies down, and something comes up again, and sometimes it's so, for instance, I remember in the beginning of the new millennium, there has been this trend about making a Romance language, and suddenly everybody was making it. Before we had a few. We had Kernu and Brittany and a few, and suddenly there was this explosion of Romance languages, and it exploded. It lasted a few months, and then it kind of died out. Some people just got bored with it. Some carried on, but at a lower pace, and something else took over. I've noticed the last years, for instance, I was a bit out of the list, and then I came back, and it was all talk about two-dimensional writing systems, and what was it? Non-spoken languages. So there was a lot of talk about grabbing languages and sign languages. And that also died out, and now we are all talking about universals and actually classifying languages in terms of what kind of universals they break, or are they this way because they evolved that way, or just because we can't think in another way. So I basically, with all that long time, I'm great, but with that long time on the list, I just see those phenomena appear and disappear. I thought it was kind of interesting to talk about it and see if others have seen this and what have they seen, and what maybe the mechanisms are behind it. So I don't know if any of you want to say something. Also, somebody who's.
Okay, hello, I'm Henrik.
And I've actually seen exactly the same because we've been on the list for about the same time. I was one of the people who followed the trend to do Romance language when everyone did this. And yeah, and I also noticed that in the very beginning of the Conlanging list, that's old archives from maybe 1993 or something like this, when it was on a different server. At that time, people were doing something really new. No one before that could discuss globally about language like this. And so I think the discussions at that time were a little bit different. There was no one who had already heard this topic on the same list. So people were talking and no one could refer back. So the discussions are very different at that time, and I really recommend if you see something on the Conlanging list, also click on the very old postings, because they often have something you don't find in the new postings.
Carsten, how long have you been on the ZBB?
I think I've joined the ZBB in 2004. I think so, 2003 or 2004, I'm not sure. Trends there, actually I don't really know. Probably it's the same is true for the ZBB also, that there are certain fashions, but well, what you can always see is people coming up with, we had a strong phase sometime, I think 2 years ago, where people would post their phonologies by the dozen and never actually much came from it. Most languages got scrapped, never went much further than the phonology stage. But I think it's a general thing on the ZBB maybe to also look at making things more or less naturalistic, but I think that's also true probably for Conlang now.
Actually, that's an interesting idea. I think one of the things that I noticed, just at least in the direction of my thinking the past couple of years, we seem to have conflated the idea of an art language as a language created for artistic purposes, and a language that is attempting to emulate or look like a natural language, that is intended to be naturalistic. It occurs to me that they do not necessarily need to be one and the same. So, for example, one of the things that I was thinking, I don't know if anybody watched the LCC4 last year, maybe, but there was this presentation by a woman who's not really a conlanger, Diana Slattery, but she had this language called Glide. Anybody look this up or remember it? I see a couple nods, but all it was is 3 glyphs and a little program that moved the glyphs, so it kind of moved the glyphs up and down and then held, so like it would move, hold, and there were a whole bunch, and I think it flipped them too, and you could have, I don't know, like 1,000 different combinations, and that was all it was. I would think of that as an artistic language, in that it was kind of, she described it as a language, but she intended it for purely artistic purposes. So, if I may venture something, I would say that there is a trend to conflate right now art lang and naturalistic. So for, I don't know maybe when this has started, but if you have any ideas, actually that's a good question. When did this idea start? Because I know that it wasn't always around. When did the idea about kind of art lang and naturalism start?
Well, I think it must have started before 2001, because when I started reading about Conlanging, it was actually around, and it was one of the reasons why I decided to back the trend and create a language which is an art lang, which I created for artistic reasons, but which is not naturalistic, which is an auxiliary language, and thus breaks universals and breaks naturalistic behavior for sake of being easy to understand.
Oh, and that was in 2001?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Well, what I think happened is I remember the first years when I was there, indeed, in 98, 99. There were a lot of alien languages around. There were a few Tolkien-like languages. The Grey Wizard was still around. There were a few run-of-the-mill Conlangs, although some were really extremely interesting. But and there were a few really really alien languages, languages spoken with tentacles or with color codes or such things like that. And you did find the descriptions on internet. I have to warn you, it was the time of Netscape 4, so it's not the fancy sites that we have nowadays. So it was quite different. And yeah, as I noticed as the list, I got the impression that the list was getting out of puberty and was getting mature. And we started getting people possibly going to university, attending linguistic classes, and starting to get more and more naturalism, as in looking like natural languages. And the only pocket where non-naturalism remained was in engineering languages, where it's just not an issue. It's not the main point. So I think what happened was people, as knowledge was gathered, and we started to see what was looked for somebody who did not know who they were speaking to, like a bunch of teenagers, as it was suddenly a bunch of 20-something of students starting to learn more and more about language, and they're starting to emulate more and more about languages that already exist.
all right, we had a question.
Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, you go.
Okay, I think in this respect, what is different on the ZBB is that, we still get lots of new people, young people, like age 13 upwards, I think, and still have long-time members who are now in university studying linguistics partly. So you get this mix. Well, I get the impression on Conlang now you've got quite a stable stock of members who've been there for quite a number of years, I think. Also, people older than on the ZBB in general.
Okay.
I was just wondering exactly where do we really draw the line between an art lang and a more naturalistic language. And by example, I'm imagining if Chinese did not exist in our world and someone tried to suggest a total language, people would tell them that was impossible. Or if we'd never heard of Miriam Makeba, nobody would believe that Kong Kung Tuani was a real word. And one thing I expected people to actually argue with me about, if I had gotten into this, is Duan makes the distinction between men and min, also between sen and xian, xian and xian. And people would expected people to tell me no natural language would have so many similar sounds. But in theory, one could, so where's the border?
I cannot really answer that question. Maybe one of you can.
Well, one thing is that for any given language, or for any given conlang, ultimately, ultimately, since most of these we're just creating them, you have to please yourself. So, if you're happy with it, then that's kind of the end of it, really. Right. But also, I'm always, and I think Carsten mentioned this in his talk too. I'm always wary of saying, no, that could never happen, because then somebody always pulls out a natural language and shows, oh, actually, it happens here. Not only that, it goes 10 times further.
Old, I think.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I think another. You mentioned that the denizenship on Conlang L seems to be older and perhaps also have been around for a longer time than on the ZBB. A side effect of that, it seems to me, seems to be that a slightly higher level is expected of people, because a lot of things have been tried. There's a lot of knowledge shared between the group membership, and that if somebody comes up with a basic conlang, that perhaps there's even a little bit of elitism, that it's hard, a little bit of barrier to entry when somebody comes up and shows something and they say, well, yeah, but that doesn't look very realistic here, or these things don't work together, or the way you presented it is a bit incomplete, and then depending on the person, it might either be, would you like us to help you improve it? The idea being that there's something which is better and something which is worse, or go back and go away and come back when you've learned to produce a proper language, sort of thing.
Oh, wait. Oh, I have an idea about the ZBB, and you'll probably add to this. But one thing that's different between Conlang List and the ZBB, and it has nothing to do with the people or anything like that, but with the it's just with the delivery system, shall we say. So like for the Conlang List, it's just a listserv, and it's delivered in linear fashion. So even if, and I know a lot of us that are on the Conlang List do this, you see, a message from somebody like, I don't want to read that, and you just click through it. You've at least looked at everything. But like the ZBB adds, because it's a forum, it adds another dimension. There's no guarantee that any given member of the ZBB, not only that they've seen every thread in a given sub forum, but then there are all the other forums. So it's like I can easily imagine, and I'm sure that this has probably happened lots of times. Somebody will post a new post on the ZBB and say, why not blah 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 blah, or here's my language where blah 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 blah, and they said like, oh yeah, actually, why don't you see all these threads that, but it's like there's no guarantee that they actually saw that simply because of the way that the forum works. Anyway.
What I wanted to say to Philip is that I think it's well, for one, it depends on the person who posts a newcomer, what their what they want. Some are really scared away by always saying, "Hey, you made a mistake there. This is not realistic." And I think, unfortunately, this happens quite a lot. I don't know whether it is people actually being unfriendly. Some are admittedly a little bit snarky. I hope I don't make any foes right now, but yeah, I think what is also a little bit of a problem is that on the internet, at least in my experience, people too often think, take things literally when it's just intended actually to be sarcasm or irony. And yeah, many newcomers, I think, are scared away by that, maybe.
And then also, I know I forget who was having this discussion, but I think we were having this discussion at lunch. There's also the difference between English as it's used by Americans, English as it's used by British speakers, and then English as it's used by second language learners. And if you take away intonation on top of that, since this is just on the internet and all you see is the text, there's just bound to be just thousands of misinterpretations, or something that was intended as a joke that was taken as a serious offense, and then if somebody just blows up and say, "Oh, I can't believe you said that. I've had it. I'm out of here." Then
One of the things I was thinking of, for example, is or the higher level or standard that's expected. If somebody posts a phonology and somebody says, and I use this symbol or this digraph, and it sounds like the E in bean, or they use natural language examples, mostly English, that some people tend to show them, look, there's this thing called IPA, and there are various ASCII transcriptions, and you can be more, you can be less ambiguous about your sound, more precise. Here are some examples, or they restate it for you. So if I've understood you correctly, I think these are the symbols you meant, implying that that a proper Conlang description will be in the jargon that is used there, because they feel that that's more suitable to a more precise description than something like the O in bone, because then they ask, well, okay, is that like Scottish bone, or is it like English bone, which is a diphthong, or etc. Yeah.
Well, if I may say something, you don't need to know IPA in order to be a good Conlanger, I think. So there is a clear difference in culture. I have subscribed to the ZBB years ago, and I have to say that I really couldn't find my place there very well. Just because everybody was completely anonymous, which I've never liked. I'm never anonymously anywhere myself. Yeah, and the fact that I had the impression that everything over there is very fragmentary. I'm not active on the command list as well at this moment, probably because I'm already a bit too old for. I think if you speak about trends, then there's one thing which I distinguish very clearly, and I have proved by that, for example, in the form of the workshops like Celtic Conlang, Romance Conlang, Germanic Conlang, and all those. They were founded 6-7 years ago and attracted hundreds of people. They were very active, and now all of them are completely inactive. All of them, yeah. Even those that we used to have sometimes hundreds of messages a month. So sometimes I wonder, what is the reason of that? Speaking for myself, well, it's quite simple. I had my whole early Conlanging career at home without a computer, because there was no computer and there was no internet as well, so I did everything on paper. And I think that most of us can say the same. So you discover the Conlanging community at some point, and you are absolutely in heaven that you can finally share and discuss and talk about everything. And well, at some point you have discussed everything you could, you have shown everything you could. So, for example, I don't really feel the need anymore to discuss my own projects with anybody, unless somebody is really interested, but in that case they will contact me privately. So I think that leaves most of the discussion to the relative newcomers. And most of those newcomers are people who were born and raised with the internet. Many of them started Conlanging because they were inspired by other Conlangers, and that's something which was not, well, virtually non-existent when we always were young. I think that's my take on this.
I have to agree with what Jan said. That is really a big trend that you see, is that people start nowadays with finding out first about the various how to make your own Conlang sites, and then see the link to the Conlang list and then go there. Whereas in my case, for instance, it was the opposite. I first found out about the Conlang list, and then I started discovering all this community around. It seems that it's general trend that goes around more recognition. That's a good thing. To come back about the thing about newcomers and how the Conlang they are sometimes a bit brush off, it's something that I found is actually cyclical. So it's again seems to be a fashion. That's so sometimes I get the idea that the list becomes extremely elitist for a moment. I don't know exactly why that happens. Maybe it's the who is very active at that moment, who might be a little bit less tolerant on beginners' mistakes, if you can call that mistakes, but who are. I do know that I sometimes, when I make what I think is a helpful advice, and I get a reply that comes down to how dare you tell me that I'm wrong, then I'm not always in the mood to try to say I did not mean anything wrong, sometimes just in the mood to say, well, sorry for trying to help you. And if you carry on like that, I'm not gonna listen to you anymore. And so you have these moments where the list is kind of very much on edge. And usually when it's really at the maximum, I get out a little bit and I wait for a few weeks or a few months, and I come back and it's suddenly extremely civil again, and you get newcomers by the dozen because it's all nice and helpful and open. And then after a few years, this happened again. And I think I've seen that already 3 times in a row, but with always a few years in between. So I don't know where that comes from, but that would be a nice trend to study, to see why does suddenly the list becomes quite hostile to newcomers, and then, yeah.
I think it's because there is a group of people finding their place, growing to kind of a community, and then getting weary of new newcomers, asking the very same questions all over again. Personally, I haven't counted how many times I've answered the question whether there are any programs on the internet free that you can make your own Conlang fonts with.
Yes.
That's a very cyclical question, probably even more than that with a trigger length some years ago. I think some of the hostility towards newbies, whatever you want to call it, comes from just being exhausted. Yeah, I think so. And it's not necessarily being mean intentionally, I think.
Yeah, I've seen these repeated questions also, and actually I sometimes thought at the first time I was someone asking this question, and then a few years later I found myself answering these questions. So there's some generations that are responsible for answering such questions, and I think this is a good thing. And yeah, maybe this is how one can avoid being a little bit annoyed by these questions. Simply let other people answer them who just learn about this and are also more eager to explain themselves, because if you know this has been asked so many times, you also tend to give very short explanations, and then this doesn't help much. Maybe you use words that are themselves not clear. So with someone who just found out a year ago or something, or maybe several months ago, can answer this a little bit with more help, actually. Yeah.
Well, one interesting observation that I have made is that on the ZBB, I think questions tend to get asked more than on the list, partly because it's a forum and not everyone has to read it. But the observation is that people who are on the board for longer don't tend to answer these questions anymore. So people stay around, but the longer they are on the list, the more they only read stuff, and the less they answer questions and help the newcomers. So the generations of people who really are active and or are seen as active tutors for Conlanging, so to speak, these generations change faster probably than the population of the forum as a whole. And I think on the list, it's more like the same group of people staying active, and then a few people entering this group and starting to participate a little bit more, but the fluctuation is much lower than on the board.
Another cyclical thing that you sometimes see, I think, on the list are periods where a lot of discussion of linguistics happens. Typically, what I see is that somebody reads up various books for a language that they are developing on, and then they are so enthusiastic about this new feature that they learned about that they want to share it with the list, or that they are trying to hash out something with the discussion. Okay, I read this interesting thing. I want to apply it to my language. I'm not sure how to do it because of X and Y. What do you think? How have other languages done it? And that makes also for a very good resource on linguistics. So when I started out, I was interested in languages, but I knew next to nothing about linguistics. I'd never heard about ergativity. I'm not sure whether I even knew what a phoneme was. And I learned a whole lot about linguistics just by lurking on the Conlang mailing list. That sort of seems to come in waves. Some periods people are presenting their languages, some periods people are discussing or trying to work on languages, but there are also times where people are talking about just basic linguistics, which are applicable to many things, sometimes in the context of their language, but then other people chime in and it's an opportunity to learn and perhaps also to teach various things which may or may not be controversial. People talk about various books that they read and or people with their linguistic theories. I think that's also a useful thing to be able to do. Who else has learned about linguistics from the mailing list? Split S and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I think if I actually would recommend to anyone who's interested in linguistics, but and not necessarily in conlanging, and wants to learn about linguistics, just put some search word in the archives and just go through, and you will learn linguistics in a much nicer and much more informal fashion than you would trying to read a book. And I try to read some linguistic books, and some are really good, but some are extremely dry. Basically, it seems that the Conlang list can sometimes be considered a Reader's Digest for linguistics, which usually, I remember those periods, usually they end because somebody complains, why are we always, that we're only talking about NatLangs, or instead of talking about Conlangs.
Yeah, I see yet another pronunciation thread. It's very popular.
Oh yeah, no, if you ever want to know how any word is pronounced in any given dialect, just go to the Conlang list, type in the word.
Yeah. Those are really those are how you call that in fashion. There is a term for things that never really go out of fashion, but always stay in the background. And yeah, and there's another word, evergreens. Yes, the evergreens, and you basically, I think the main evergreens is yet another English pronunciation thread. Usage. Yeah, that's a little, but I think once again I'm coming back to the Romance language, but I think there seems to be a rite of passage that nearly every conlanger once in the tries their hand as a Romance language. I think the Romance language is probably the family with the most languages in the world, if you count the Carlons.
Yeah. Well, creating a Romance language is about the same thing for a conlanger as writing a symphony for a composer. But if I may say something, there's also a quite active forum in Poland for Polish conlangers with some 30, 40 active people. And they massively create Slavic conlangs. Really, a lot of them. So many that I think they outnumber all the other ones created in the whole world, because there are tons of them, literally. Romance also, but much, much less.
So, just out of curiosity, I was wondering, since the idea of transit conlanging came up, how many of you, and people in the audience can answer too, how many of you actually participated in one of these trends? And I will start you off. So when the ergativity trend was going around, I did indeed create an ergative language. That one was set theater, and it still has not crystallized very well. And then I also created a minimal language. But I think, I'm not sure if that was before the trend or not, because that came from something that I was doing, but I definitely participated in the ergative one. Oh, and also the visual one, the visual languages when we had that going.
Yeah, I remember at least well, 2 or 3 trends. I already mentioned the Romance trend when I applied the Icelandic sound changes to Volga Latin Jotun, and but actually I was quite late. It was already the end of this trend, and there were not very many relays around that could have a whole Romlang ring. So before that, I was very jealous. There were 2 relays with I don't know, 2 rings of Romlang. So then nobody wanted to participate when I had my Romlang ready. Yeah, and then before that, there was a lot of theoretical discussion on the Conlanging mailing list, and I learned about Anschlangs and about split ergativity and active passive languages, this stuff, and then I started to create Tsunkai, which is the, I think, most abstract language I've been working on. And so this is at least these 2 trends. Did I say 3 before? I don't know.
All right.
Well, about those trends, as I must say, when the Romance Conlang trend fashion started, I kind of cheated because I already had a Romance Conlang in my pocket that I never talked about. So I basically just took back my notes, dusted them, started reworking them a little, and woof, suddenly I had, I think I posted 10 1,000-word posts on the list in 3 days or something. And I think that half of them were not read at all because they were just too long. Yeah, I remember you were them.
You actually had 2 Romans, if I remember.
Yes, I still do. Still do, but one I didn't touch again, although that I've talked about it a little bit lately. But the other one was the more naturalistic one. I was probably the only person who has a Romance language which could nearly be considered non-naturalistic. Yeah, that was also something, but yeah, there's been this. Oh, I don't know if it was really. There was a moment where there was a lot of discussion about exceptions and irregularity and how far can you go. And there was Ramnanri or something like that, which actually the air is written ET or something, which was actually a language which looked irregular but was actually extremely regular. And I had in the back pocket again a kind of Celtic-like language that I had made before I was on the list. Because I had gone to Ireland for a week, and before going to Ireland, I need to do something about Irish Gaelic. So I had read a little booklet about Irish Gaelic, and discovered an orthography that I couldn't make heads or tails of, and decided that I could do better. And then came the idea of Miguel, which is as its 3rd iteration. And I'm afraid to say that it's kind of a vaporware language in that I never managed to get very far with it because it's so damn difficult. But I promise I'll do my best to get at least the null morphology finished.
Okay, to be honest, I always thought that Magal was just kind of an elaborate joke. But I'm glad to hear it's not.
I can tell you I have pages and pages and pages of things just to try to describe noun-number morphology. I think just noun number for morphology takes 20 pages, but it is kind of an elaborate joke that went a little bit too far.
so let's get if you have any last minute questions, this is the time. Huh? Oh.
Actually, I didn't even have a question, I'm sorry.
You were raising your hand.
I was stretching.
Okay, well, I remember, by the way, I remember another late trend that I think rose quick and died early was the collaborative language trend, where everybody was getting together and creating a collaborative language. And they all failed, but tomorrow, tomorrow we're going to hear about the one that didn't, a little promo for tomorrow, and also some great ZBB Conlanging, so look forward to that. Look forward to that presentation tomorrow. Okay, it's almost, it's about 5:45, so I recommend that we wrap things up, and thank you all for a great first day, and we'll see you tomorrow. And thank you so much, everybody.